My father's house was in a small town in Texas. When I was 5 years old, my mother passed away. My father remarried, and my stepmother used to treat me terribly. She wouldn't feed me properly, and my father never said anything. If I ever asked to go to school, she would punish me. This went on for several years. When I was around 12 or 13, my father sent me to live with a family in the neighboring town. There, I was treated so poorly that I couldn't bear it. 3 months in, I ran away and went to my maternal grandfather's house in Oklahoma. But they were struggling financially and could barely feed themselves. In exchange for 2 meals a day, I started working in other people's homes, doing odd jobs like cleaning or babysitting. One day, while walking home after a babysitting job, I fainted on the side of the road due to exhaustion. A kind truck driver found me, revived me, and took me home. After hearing my story, he and his wife decided to take me in because they didn't have a daughter, only a son. I was treated very well in that house. My adoptive father loved me dearly, and my adoptive brother, who was older than me, got me enrolled in the same school he attended. My adoptive mother also cared for me initially, but over time, her behavior started to change. I don't know why. At that time, I was in 5th grade, and my brother was in college. He had a cell phone, and whenever he left it charging, I would secretly use it to text. That's how I got to know a boy named Ethan. Since my adoptive mother's behavior toward me had worsened, I ran away to Ethan's house in 2014. Ethan was from a small town in Colorado, near the Rocky Mountains. The day I arrived at his house, they arranged for us to get married that very night. His father accepted me, but his mother wasn't as welcoming. Still, for the first few days, she treated me well. Later, they found out about my past and my family. My mother-in-law was a greedy woman. She said she would accept me only if my father paid her money. But my real father wouldn't even acknowledge me. Eventually, my mother-in-law refused to let me stay, but my father-in-law intervened. This is how I went from one difficult situation to another. My husband and father-in-law loved me dearly, but everyone was afraid of my mother-in-law. I tried my best to win her over but failed. A year into our marriage, one night after my mother-in-law had gone to sleep, my husband secretly took me out for a walk. It was around 11 p.m. to midnight. Since it was a rural area, there was no one outside except us. We stood on a small bridge, chatting. My hair was loose. After about half an hour, I felt a cold breeze on my body. It was summer, and the wind was blowing, but this breeze felt different. I didn't think much of it and returned home secretly. This is where the real incident began. After that night, I started behaving strangely. I would dress up in a formal gown at night, stand on the bed, and dance. When my husband tried to stop me, I would attack him. After a struggle, I would faint, and when I regained consciousness, I wouldn't remember anything. This went on for several days, but my husband didn't tell anyone at home since it only happened at night. However, my sister-in-law saw me one day and told my mother-in-law. Instead of helping me, my mother-in-law started calling me a witch. My father-in-law called a local pastor who was known for dealing with spiritual matters. The pastor examined me and said I had been affected by an evil presence. He gave me a small cross to wear, and after that, I was fine. 2 years into our marriage, I became pregnant. My mother-in-law wasn't happy about this news. When I was 2 months pregnant, she gave me some medicine, saying it would make the baby healthy. I didn't know any better, so I took it. 2 hours later, I started bleeding heavily. I had tried so hard to please her, but this time, I lost my temper and started screaming. My father-in-law, who worked at a bank in Denver and came home every weekend, saw this and took me and Ethan to Denver to live with him. He told us not to let my mother-in-law know. Things were fine for a while, but one night, I started calling out Ethan's name in a terrifying voice. Ethan got scared and called his father, who managed to calm me down by reciting prayers. But this started happening frequently. I would scream so loudly that the neighbors couldn't sleep and began complaining. My father-in-law, having no other option, called another pastor. As soon as the pastor entered the house, I started cursing him in a vulgar language and told him to leave. But he stayed, recited prayers, and performed a blessing. This went on for a few days until I fainted. He then gave my father-in-law a small vial of holy water and said, "Keep this with her. It has been blessed. Nothing will be able to harm her for now. If it doesn't work, let me know." Ethan placed the vial near me, and that day, nothing happened. But at midnight, I called out Ethan's name in a terrifying voice again, threw the vial at him, and said, "What did you think? You can't control me with this. I'll kill you, your father, and even that pastor." Ethan got so scared that he locked me in the room and went outside. I kept screaming until dawn. When Ethan didn't hear any noise, he opened the door and found me unconscious on the floor. He and my father-in-law put me on the bed and called the pastor, who said he was busy and would come the next day. Ethan placed the vial near me again, and that day, nothing happened. The next day, before going to work, my father-in-law bought groceries, including fish and steak. The pastor arrived by noon. Ethan, who didn't have a job, stayed at home. He asked me to cook the fish and steak. I seemed completely normal. I took the ingredients to the kitchen, and Ethan stayed in the living room watching TV. After a while, he came to the kitchen and found me sitting and eating the raw fish. I laughed horrifically and asked him to join me. Ethan, not knowing what to do, locked me in the kitchen and called his father. When my father-in-law arrived and opened the kitchen, he found me unconscious on the floor, my face smeared with fish blood and dirt. The pastor arrived shortly after and took me to the bedroom. He told my father-in-law that I had been affected by dark forces. To break it, he asked my father-in-law to gather certain items, which I won't mention here. My father-in-law collected them within a week, and the pastor came every day to recite prayers and perform blessings. He also gave me a small cross to wear. Eventually, he succeeded in freeing me from the dark influence. Later, I learned from Ethan that my lips and mouth were covered in sores. When I heard this, I vomited. When I asked who had done this to me, no one told me at the time, but I suspected my mother-in-law. One day, I secretly called the pastor and begged him to tell me the truth. After much insistence, he revealed that my mother-in-law had done this horrible thing to drive me away from Ethan. This broke my heart because everyone in my in-laws' neighborhood knew how hard I had tried to please her. Eventually, I left with Ethan without telling anyone and moved to Arizona, where we both found jobs. This is my story.